Boring history for sleep. The most absurd ancient battles that changed nothing. In the silent hours of a summer night in 93 CE, General Marcus Valerius Aquila stood on a small hill overlooking what would soon become a battlefield near the northern frontier of the Roman Empire. The moonlight cast long shadows across the rolling plains as thousands of men slept, preparing for what their commanders had described as a decisive engagement against a local Germanic tribe. Marcus knew better. 23 years of military service had taught him that most battles decided nothing at all. Tomorrow's conflict would be another meaningless addition to Rome's military ledger, a battle that history would forget before the blood dried on the soil. The cool night air carried the scent of campfires and unwashed men. Marcus pulled his weathered red cloak tighter around his shoulders, feeling the weight of his 50 years in the stiffness of his joints. His once black hair was now streaked with grey, his face lined with the experiences of countless campaigns. The empire had expanded and contracted like a breathing beast during his lifetime, yet he questioned how much had truly changed because of the battles he had fought. "General, the scouts have returned," said a voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Lucilius Flavius, his chief strategist, approaching through the tall grass. At 28, Lucilia, as most called her, was unusually young for her position, but her mind was sharper than most of the veteran commanders. Her father had been a noted scholar in Rome before falling out of favor with the emperor, and she had grown up with access to texts on military strategy from across the empire. In a world dominated by men, she had found her place through exceptional intellect and a family name that still carried enough weight to open certain doors. "What news?" Marcus asked, his voice flat and disinterested. "The chatty warriors number approximately 4,000, positioned behind the ridge to the east. They appear to be waiting for reinforcements," Lucilia replied, her dark eyes studying the general's expression carefully. "This presents an opportunity to engage before they reach full strength." Marcus gave a humorless laugh. "An opportunity? Yes, I suppose that's what Rome would call it." "Oh, you don't agree?" Lucilia asked, standing beside him now. Her simple tunic and military cloak couldn't disguise her feminine form, but her demeanor demanded professional respect. 4,000 chatty warriors or 6,000, what difference does it make? The Senate will receive their report. The Emperor will hold a modest celebration. A few minor officials will advance their careers. And in 5 years, we'll be back here fighting the same tribe over the same worthless stretch of forest and field. Lucilia frowned. This campaign secures the northern trade routes. It protects Roman settlements from raids. For a season, perhaps 2, Marcus replied. Then some ambitious chieftain will unite a few clans, and we'll march north again. The borders shift like sand dunes, Lucilia. Nothing we do here matters. The young strategist fell silent, considering his words. In the distance, a lone wolf howled, the sound echoing across the battlefield that would soon be littered with the bodies of men fighting for causes they barely understood. Miles away, in the Roman camp, Faustus Cornelius Lentulus cleaned his gladius with methodical precision. At 20, he was still new to the 10th Legion, having joined just 18 months prior, with dreams of glory, wealth, and perhaps even political advancement upon his return to Rome. The son of a moderately successful merchant, Faustus had chosen military service over continuing in his father's footsteps, much to the older man's disappointment. "You're wasting oil," remarked Titus, a veteran soldier of 15 campaigns who shared Faustus's tent. "That blade won't get any sharper." Faustus looked up, his youthful face serious in the flickering light of the oil lamp. "My father always said that care for one's tools reflects care for one's work." Titus snorted. "Your father sold olive oil and garum sauce. This is war. Tomorrow that pretty sword will be covered in dirt and blood, and if you're lucky enough to survive, you'll clean it again for the next battle that changes nothing." "Changes nothing?" Faustus frowned. "We're securing the frontier for Rome. Is that what they told you?" Titus laughed, the sound hollow and tired. I've fought in Hispania Gaul and twice in Britannia. I've helped secure the same frontiers over and over. The only things that change are the names of the generals taking credit and the number of scars on my body." Faustus returned to polishing his sword, refusing to let the older man's cynicism dampen his spirits. Tomorrow would be his first real battle. His chance to prove himself worthy of the stories he'd heard since childhood about brave Romans bringing civilization to the barbarian lands. As dawn broke over the northern frontier, 3 individuals with vastly different expectations prepared for a battle that history would scarcely remember, yet which would transform each of them in ways they couldn't imagine. The morning fog hung low over the battlefield as the Roman legions formed their lines. The precision of their movements spoke to years of disciplined training, each man knowing exactly where to stand, how to hold his shield, when to advance. From the command position, Marcus watched with detached professional pride. Whatever his personal feelings about the futility of this engagement, the 10th Legion was a formidable fighting force. "The Chatti have formed a defensive line along the tree line," Lucilia reported, pointing toward the distant forest edge. "Their chieftain appears to be Arminius, the younger son of Segestes, not particularly experienced, but eager to prove himself." "Aren't they all?" Marcus replied dryly. "Position the auxiliary archers on the left flank. Let's see if we can draw them out of the trees." As Lucilia departed to relay the orders, Marcus surveyed the battlefield once more. In the distance, he could see the Germanic tribesmen, fierce warriors with long hair and painted bodies, carrying a hodgepodge of weapons. Some bore captured Roman equipment, others wielded traditional spears and axes. They lacked the disciplined formation of the Romans, but made up for it with individual ferocity and knowledge of the terrain. In the front line of the Roman formation, Faustus stood shoulder to shoulder with his fellow legionaries, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain the men beside him must hear it. The weight of his shield, the pressure of his helmet against his temples, the constriction of his armor across his chest, everything felt simultaneously too heavy and too fragile. "Steady," murmured Titus beside him. "Remember your training, stay in formation, and you might live to see sunset." Faustus nodded, unable to speak through his dry throat. Across the field, the Germanic warriors had begun their traditional pre-battle ritual. Banging weapons against shields and shouting challenges, the sound echoed across the open ground, designed to intimidate. "They're trying to frighten us," Faustus managed to say. "And doing a fine job of it by the look on your face," Titus replied with grim humor. "Just remember, they're as scared as you are. They just show it differently." The Roman trumpets sounded, signaling the advance of the auxiliary archers. Hundreds of men moved in unison, marching forward to take position. The morning sun had begun to burn away the fog, revealing the full scale of the opposing forces. From his position, Faustus could now clearly see the Germanic warriors, their wild hair, their painted faces, their mismatched armor scavenged from previous battles. "Gods below," he whispered. "There are so many of them." "There always are," Titus said flatly, "and yet here we stand." The first volley of arrows arced through the air, falling among the Germanic lines. Cries of pain and rage echoed across the field. The battle had begun. In her position beside the general, Lucilia watched the opening movements with analytical precision. The auxiliary archers had done their job, drawing a portion of the Germanic warriors out from the protection of the trees. Undisciplined and enraged, several hundred Chatti charged across the open field, exactly as planned. "They take the bait," she observed. "Shall I signal the flanking maneuver?" Marcus nodded, his expression unchanged. "Proceed. Let's get this over with." As the signal flags waved, the Roman cavalry, hidden in a small copse of trees to the right, emerged, racing to intercept the charging Germans from the side. It was a classic Roman tactic, one that had worked countless times against less disciplined forces. Lucilia felt a surge of satisfaction as the plan unfolded perfectly. The Germanic charge faltered as warriors turned to face the new threat. breaking their momentum and creating confusion in their ranks. This was the brilliant strategy she had spent days formulating, a plan that would minimize Roman casualties while demonstrating superior tactical thinking. The center cohorts should advance now, she suggested, her voice betraying her excitement despite her efforts to maintain professional detachment. Marcus gave her a sidelong glance. "You still believe this matters, don't you?" Before she could respond, a messenger arrived, breathless from his run up the hill. "General, a second Germanic force has been spotted approaching from the north. At least 2,000 warriors. They'll reach the battlefield within the hour." Marcus received this news without surprise. "Of course they are. The Chatti aren't fools. They knew we were coming." He turned to Lucilia, whose face had fallen at this unexpected development. "Your perfect plan needs adjustment, strategist. What do you propose now?" Lucilia's mind raced, calculating new variables and possibilities. "We should press the advantage against the current force, defeat them decisively before the reinforcements arrive. If we can break their will to fight—" "Break their will," Marcus interrupted. "These aren't Roman politicians, Lucilia. These are Germanic tribesmen defending their homeland. Their will doesn't break when they lose a battle. It hardens." "Then what would you suggest?" she asked, a hint of frustration coloring her voice. Marcus surveyed the battlefield, where the Roman cavalry was now fully engaged with the Germanic warriors who had been lured into the open. "We do what Rome always does. We kill enough of them to claim victory, lose enough of our own to give the battle significance, and then retreat to our fortifications, claiming we've taught them a lesson. In a month, they'll raid a settlement to prove we haven't." Lucilia stared at him, stunned by his cynicism. "If that's how you view warfare, why continue as a general?" A humorless smile crossed Marcus's weathered face. "Because it's the only thing I know how to do, and Rome needs its generals, even the ones who know the truth." The clash of metal against metal filled the air as Faustus found himself face to face with a Germanic warrior. The man was enormous, at least a head taller than Faustus, with a tangled red beard and arms covered in blue spiral tattoos. He wielded a massive axe that he swung with terrifying force against Faustus's shield. The impact reverberated through Faustus's entire body, nearly knocking him off his feet. He had trained for this moment countless times, but the reality was far more chaotic and frightening than any practice drill. The formation had partially broken as the Romans engaged with the charging Germans, though veteran legionaries fought to maintain the line. "Thrust! Don't slash!" Titus shouted from somewhere to his right. Remembering his training, Faustus stabbed forward with his gladius, aiming for the gap between the Germanic warrior's crude leather armor pieces. He felt the blade connect, sliding into flesh with sickening ease. The warrior's eyes widened in shock, then dulled as he collapsed to the ground. Faustus stood frozen, staring at the fallen man. He had just taken a human life, something he had prepared for mentally, but whose emotional impact he couldn't have anticipated. There was no time to process the feeling, however, as another warrior immediately took the place of the fallen one. The battle became a blur of violence and survival instinct. Faustus moved as he had been trained, his body responding to threats while his mind remained oddly detached. Thrust, block, advance with the line, maintain formation. Men fell around him, both Roman and Germanic, their cries of pain adding to the cacophony of battle. Hours seemed to pass, though in reality it had been less than one. Sweat poured down Faustus's face, stinging his eyes and soaking the padding beneath his armor. His arm ached from the weight of his shield, his shoulder burned from a glancing blow he'd taken from a spear, yet he remained standing, surrounded by the dead and dying. A trumpet call sounded across the battlefield, the signal to regroup and reform lines. The Romans began a disciplined withdrawal, maintaining their shields as they backed away from direct engagement. Faustus found himself being pulled back into formation by Titus, who had a bloody gash across his forehead, but seemed otherwise unharmed. "Stay with the line," the veteran ordered. "This isn't over." And indeed, as the Romans reformed their ranks, the remaining Germanic warriors did the same, retreating to the edge of the forest. Both sides used the momentary lull to tend to their wounded, retrieve the fallen, and prepare for the next phase of battle. Faustus used the brief respite to catch his breath, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The ground was littered with bodies, the grass stained dark with blood. This was the glory of Rome he had dreamed about, this senseless slaughter on a distant frontier. "How many do you think we've killed?" he asked Titus, his voice hoarse. "Not enough to matter," the veteran replied grimly. "Look there." He pointed toward the north, where dust clouds indicated the approach of the Germanic reinforcements. Faustus felt a wave of despair. They had fought so hard already, and now faced fresh enemies. "Will we retreat?" Titus shook his head. "Not yet. First we'll engage again, lose more men, and then retreat, claiming tactical repositioning. It's the Roman way." From the command hill, Marcus watched the approaching Germanic reinforcements with resignation. The battle was proceeding exactly as thousands before it had. Initial Roman success, followed by complications, followed by a withdrawal that would be documented as a strategic decision rather than a necessity. "Signal the trumpeters," he ordered. "Have the center cohorts prepare to advance once more. We'll engage the enemy briefly to demonstrate our resolve, then conduct an orderly withdrawal to the fortified camp." Lucilia looked at him with disbelief. "That's it? We're retreating after a single engagement? We're preserving our forces for the decisive battle that will come next week or next month," Marcus replied. "This skirmish has served its purpose. We've bloodied the Chatti, demonstrated Roman might, and collected enough Germanic heads to satisfy the political officers. What more would you have us do?" "Fight to win," Lucilia said firmly. "We still have numerical superiority if we commit the reserves. The Germanic reinforcements are still disorganized from their march. If we press now..." "And then what?" Marcus interrupted. "We kill more of them, lose more of our own, and perhaps push the frontier a few miles further north for a season." "To what end, Lucilia? So that next year another general can fight the same battle for the same worthless stretch of land?" Lucilia's face flushed with anger. "If that's how you view your duty, perhaps you should resign your commission." "Perhaps I should," Marcus agreed, surprising her. "But not today. Today we follow the same script Rome has followed for centuries. We fight. We claim victory, regardless of the outcome, and we pretend it matters." He turned to his signaller. "Give the order for advance, followed by tactical withdrawal to defensive positions." As the trumpets sounded the advance, the Roman lines began to move forward once more. Faustus felt a curious detachment as he marched with his comrades toward the waiting Germanic warriors. The initial terror of battle had been replaced by a numb acceptance. He would fight, because that's what he had been trained to do, because the men beside him were fighting, because Rome expected it of him. The clash, when it came, was even more brutal than the first engagement. The Germanic warriors, enraged by their losses and emboldened by their approaching reinforcements, fought with renewed ferocity. The disciplined Roman lines began to buckle under the assault. Faustus found himself separated from Titus, surrounded by a swirl of combat. A spear thrust caught him in the thigh, the point piercing his armor and drawing a hot line of pain across his flesh. He staggered, nearly falling, but managed to dispatch his attacker with a desperate swing of his gladius. Blood soaked his leggings, but the wound wasn't deep enough to take him out of the fight. All around him, Romans and Germans alike were falling. The ordered battle lines had dissolved into chaotic individual combats. This wasn't the glorious warfare of the stories. This was butchery, plain and simple. A massive Germanic warrior wielding a two-handed sword charged toward Faustus, his face a mask of battle rage. Faustus raised his shield, knowing it wouldn't be enough to stop the powerful blow. In that moment, he was certain he was about to die. The blow never came. Instead, Titus appeared from nowhere, driving his gladius into the Germanic warrior's side. The huge man fell, and Titus grabbed Faustus by the shoulder. "The retreat has been sounded," the veteran shouted over the din of battle. "Fall back!" Indeed, the Roman trumpets were blaring the signal for withdrawal. All around them, legionaries were disengaging and retreating in formation, maintaining their shields as they moved backward in disciplined rows. Faustus limped alongside Titus, using his shield to protect them both as they rejoined the Roman lines. The legionaries continued their orderly withdrawal across the field, maintaining enough cohesion to prevent a full Germanic pursuit. By the time they reached the relative safety of the Roman camp, the Germanic reinforcements had arrived on the battlefield. Rather than press the attack against the fortified Roman position, however, the Chatti were content to claim the field, celebrating their victory in driving off the Roman forces. In the medical tent, a harried physician briefly examined Faustus's leg wound, declared it non-life-threatening, and moved on to more seriously injured soldiers. Faustus sat on a wooden bench, watching as men with far worse injuries were brought in. Some would not survive the night. "Your first real battle," Titus said, sitting heavily beside him. The veteran had cleaned the blood from his face, revealing a cut that would add another scar to his collection. "What did you think of your taste of glory?" Faustus stared at his blood-stained hands. "There was no glory out there, just killing and dying." Titus nodded approvingly. "Now you're beginning to understand. The only glory is in surviving, and if you're lucky, returning home someday." "What was even the point of today?" Faustus asked, the question directed as much to himself as to Titus. "We marched out, killed some Germans, lost some Romans, and then retreated. What did we accomplish? Officially, we taught the barbarians to fear Rome," Titus replied with bitter humor. "In reality, nothing that will matter a year from now." He clapped Faustus on the shoulder. "Get some rest. We'll likely do it all again soon enough." As night fell over the camp, Marcus sat alone in his tent, a cup of watered wine in his hand. Maps and reports were scattered across the table before him, illuminated by oil lamps. The day's battle had gone exactly as he had predicted. Initial engagement, unexpected complications, tactical withdrawal. The official report he would send to Rome was already drafted, emphasizing Roman discipline and downplaying the retreat as a strategic repositioning. A shadow appeared at the entrance to his tent. "Permission to enter, General," came Lucilia's voice. "Granted," Marcus replied, not looking up from the maps. Lucilia stepped inside, her face composed, but her eyes revealing her inner turmoil. "The casualty reports, sir. 78 dead, 143 wounded. 23 not expected to survive the night," Marcus nodded, adding the figures to his report. "Better than most engagements. The men fought well." "They fought well for nothing," Lucilia said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "We accomplished nothing today." "Welcome to the reality of Roman military glory," Marcus replied, finally looking up at her. "Did you expect something different?" Lucilia hesitated, then sat down uninvited across from him. "Yes. I believed the strategic texts. I believed my instructors at the academy. I believed in Rome's divine mission to bring order to chaos, civilization to barbarians. And now? Now I wonder if you're right. If all of this," she gestured toward the maps of the frontier, "is just an endless cycle with no real purpose." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "You're learning faster than I did. It took me 15 years to see the truth." "So what do we do with this truth?" Lucilia asked. "Simply continue the charade. Fight battles we know are meaningless." "What alternative would you suggest?" Marcus countered. "Rome needs its myths. The Senate needs its victories. The Emperor needs his conquests. And the people, both Roman and those we conquer, need to believe there's a purpose to all the bloodshed." Lucilia fell silent, contemplating his words. Outside the tent, they could hear the sounds of the camp settling for the night. The murmur of conversations, the occasional laugh, the groans of the wounded. "Get some rest," Marcus finally said. "Tomorrow, we begin planning the next decisive engagement that will change nothing." As Lucilia left, Marcus returned to his report. For 23 years, he had fought Rome's battles, commanded its legions, expanded and defended its frontiers. And what had changed? The empire's borders shifted like sand dunes in a desert wind, advancing and retreating with each generation. Tribes were conquered, only to rebel a decade later. Provinces were pacified, only to require reconquest by the next generation of generals. Yet the machine of Rome's military glory ground on, requiring its sacrifices of blood and bone. And Marcus, despite seeing the futility of it all, continued to play his part. Because what else was there for a man who had given his life to Rome's legions? In the common soldiers' area of the camp, Faustus lay awake on his bedroll, staring up at the tent canvas. His injured leg throbbed dully, but it was not physical pain keeping him from sleep. Around him, other soldiers snored or spoke in hushed tones, or simply lay in exhausted silence. "Can't sleep?" Titus asked from the darkness nearby. "No," Faustus admitted. "I keep seeing their faces. The men I killed today." "That will fade," Titus assured him. "Not completely, but enough that you can function." "I didn't think it would be like this," Faustus said after a long pause. "In the stories, battles are glorious. Heroes face worthy adversaries and triumph through courage and skill. But today was just confusion and blood and death." "Stories are for children and civilians," Titus replied. "They need to believe in the glory to send their sons to die for Rome." Faustus rolled onto his side, facing toward where he knew Titus lay, though he could barely make out the veteran's form in the darkness. "Then why do you continue? If you know the truth, why not leave the legions?" Titus was quiet for so long that Faustus thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally, the older man spoke, his voice softer than Faustus had ever heard it. "Because this is the only family I have now. Because I wouldn't know what to do with peace. Because at least here, among men who understand, I don't have to pretend that what we do matters." The honesty of the answer struck Faustus deeply. He had joined the legions seeking glory and advancement, but perhaps what he would find instead was this: a brotherhood of men bound together by shared truths, too brutal for the outside world to acknowledge. As dawn broke over the camp, preparations were already underway for the legion's withdrawal to more established fortifications 10 miles south. The wounded were loaded onto wagons, tents were struck, and equipment was packed with the efficiency that made Rome's armies the most formidable in the known world. Marcus oversaw the operations from horseback, his face impassive as he issued orders and received reports. Beside him, Lucilia appeared pale and drawn, having spent a sleepless night reconsidering everything she had believed about Roman military strategy. "The scouts report that the Germanic forces have withdrawn to their settlements," she informed Marcus. "They're celebrating their victory over Rome." "As they should," Marcus replied. "Let them enjoy their moment. It will make little difference in the end." "And what of our dead?" Lucilia asked, gesturing toward the wagons being loaded with shrouded bodies. "They will be honored as heroes of Rome," Marcus said, his tone neutral. "Their families will receive the standard compensation. Their names will be recorded in the legion's rolls, and in a generation no one will remember why they died." Lucilia looked away, unable to maintain her professional detachment in the face of such cold truth. "There must be more to it than this," she said quietly. Marcus studied her for a moment. "Perhaps there is. Not in the grand strategies or the expanding frontiers, but in the small moments. In Titus saving Faustus on the battlefield yesterday, in the physician working through the night to save the wounded, in soldiers sharing their water with dying enemies after the battle. You notice such things?" Lucilia asked, surprised by this glimpse of humanity in the cynical general. "I've had 23 years to look for meaning in meaningless wars," Marcus replied. "If there is any to be found, it's not in the battles we fight, but in how we fight them." As the legion prepared to march, Faustus found himself assigned to a wagon carrying wounded soldiers. His injury, while not severe enough to require evacuation, exempted him from marching formation. He sat at the back of the wagon, his legs dangling over the edge, watching as the battlefield where they had fought yesterday receded into the distance. Titus appeared, walking alongside the wagon. "How's the leg?" "Better than it deserves to be," Faustus replied. "The physician says I'll be fit for duty within a week, just in time for the next pointless battle," Titus said with a hint of his usual cynicism, but there was something different in his tone, almost affectionate. Faustus glanced at the men lying in the wagon behind him, some unconscious, others bearing their pain in stoic silence. Was it worth it? Their sacrifices, I mean. Titus was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Worth it for Rome, for the Emperor, for some grand strategy? No. He looked up at Faustus, his weathered face solemn. But worth it for the man next to them in the line? For their brothers in the Legion? Perhaps. It was not the answer Faustus had expected, but as he contemplated it, he realized it held more truth than all the glorious stories he'd been raised on. Perhaps there was no grand meaning to be found in these endless frontier conflicts, but there was meaning in how men faced them together. As the Roman column wound its way south, away from a battlefield that history would scarcely remember, three individuals contemplated the nature of a war without purpose, a battle without consequence, and the small moments of humanity that somehow made it bearable. The legion's withdrawal to the southern fortress took 3 days of marching through forests and fields that seemed peaceful in the summer sunshine. It was difficult to imagine that these same lands were constantly contested by Rome and the Germanic tribes. That blood had soaked into this soil for generations and would continue to do so for generations more. On the evening of the 3rd day, as the fortress came into view on a distant hill, Marcus called his officers together for a council. In a spacious tent erected for the purpose, the centurions and tribunes gathered around a table where maps were spread out, weighted down with stones at the corners. "Our orders from Rome are clear," Marcus began without preamble. "We are to secure the frontier against Germanic incursions and protect the trade routes to the northern settlements. To that end, we will establish a series of outposts along this line." He traced a finger across the map, indicating a roughly east-west line 20 miles north of their current position. The officers nodded, accepting the strategy without question. All except Lucilia, who studied the map with a furrowed brow. "Something to add, strategist?" Marcus asked, noting her expression. Lucilia hesitated, aware of the senior officer's attention. "The proposed line places our forces directly between 3 major Germanic settlements. We would be deliberately creating points of friction rather than establishing a defensible frontier." A murmur ran through the gathered officers. It was unusual for anyone to question the general's strategy so directly, especially a young woman who many still viewed as an outsider despite her position. Marcus, however, simply nodded. "An astute observation. And your point?" Emboldened, Lucilia continued. "If our true goal is to secure the frontier, we would be better served by establishing our line here." She indicated a position further south, along a river that provided a natural barrier. "The Germanic tribes would have to cross exposed ground to attack, giving us advance warning and tactical advantage." "And why would Rome reject such a sensible strategy in favor of the more provocative one?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Lucilia met his gaze, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Because securing the frontier isn't the true objective. Creating conflicts that justify continued military presence is." A heavy silence fell over the tent. Many of the veteran officers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding each other's eyes. The truth that had just been spoken aloud was one that many of them had long suspected, but dared not articulate. "Rome needs its enemies," Marcus said quietly. "Without them, what justification would there be for the legions, for the taxes that support them, for the political careers built on military glory?" The officers absorbed this in silence. For most, it was not a new revelation, merely an uncomfortable one to have voiced so plainly. "So we will establish our outposts as ordered," Marcus continued, his voice returning to its normal professional tone. We will provoke the inevitable attacks. We will repel them with appropriate losses on both sides, and we will report our successes to Rome, where they will be celebrated as evidence of the Empire's divine purpose. The meeting concluded shortly thereafter, the officers dispersing to relay orders to their men. Only Lucilia remained, staring at the map with new understanding. You deliberately baited me into that observation, she said once they were alone. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. You needed to say it aloud, to hear yourself speak the truth. And what am I supposed to do with this truth? Lucilia asked, a hint of desperation in her voice. Continue to plan strategies for battles that serve no purpose beyond perpetuating themselves. That, Marcus replied, is a question each of us must answer for ourselves. The next morning, as the legions settled into the fortress, Faustus found himself assigned to patrol duty despite his still healing leg. He suspected Titus had arranged it. The veteran had connections among the centurions, and patrol duty was preferable to the heavy labor of fortification work. The patrol route took them along the western approach to the fortress, through fields of wheat that local farmers continued to tend despite the constant threat of warfare. As Faustus walked beside Titus and 4 other legionaries, he was struck by the peasants' resilience, or perhaps their resignation, to a life lived in the shadow of Rome's endless conflicts. How long has Rome been fighting in these lands? He asked Titus, as they crested a small rise overlooking a particularly picturesque valley. Longer than anyone can remember, Titus replied. My grandfather fought the same tribes in roughly the same places, as did his grandfather before him, most likely. Faustus watched as a farmer and his son worked their field below, seemingly unconcerned by the armed Romans passing nearby. And what has changed in all that time? The names of the generals, the specific locations of the fortresses, little else. Titus adjusted his shield to a more comfortable position on his shoulder. The land remains, the people remain, both Roman and Germanic. They plant crops, raise children, pray to their gods, and occasionally kill each other when their leaders demand it. Then why continue? Titus glanced at him with something like approval. That's the question, isn't it? Why do the Germanic tribes not simply submit to Roman rule, knowing they cannot ultimately prevail? Why does Rome not simply withdraw to more defensible borders, knowing it cannot truly conquer these lands and peoples? And the answer: I'm just a soldier boy, Titus said with a wry smile. If I had answers to such questions, I'd be a philosopher in Rome, not patrolling this forgotten frontier. Their conversation was interrupted by a shout from one of the other legionaries. In the distance, a group of riders was approaching, not Germanic warriors, but Roman cavalry, escorting an ornate carriage that could only belong to a high-ranking official. Well, well, Titus murmured. It seems we have a visitor from civilization. This should be interesting. The patrol changed course, heading back to the fortress to report what they had seen. By the time they arrived, the fortress was already buzzing with activity. Servants were rushing to prepare suitable quarters, cooks were planning elaborate meals, and officers were donning their formal armor. Who is it? Faustus asked a legionary who was hurriedly polishing decorative shields to be displayed in the headquarters building. Senator Gaius Petronius Longus, the man replied, without looking up from his work. Special envoy from the emperor himself, they say. Titus snorted. Political oversight? Wonderful. Is that bad? Faustus asked. It means someone in Rome has taken an interest in our little corner of the empire, Titus explained, as they made their way to their quarters to clean up after patrol. And when politicians take an interest in military matters, soldiers tend to die in greater numbers than usual. In the commander's office, Marcus received the news of the senator's approach with outward calm and inner dread. Political visitors never brought good news for career soldiers. Either they came to claim credit for successes or to assign blame for failures, or, worst of all, to involve the legions in some new scheme to advance their careers in Rome. Have quarters prepared in the officers' section, he instructed his adjutant, and inform the kitchen to prepare appropriate refreshments. I'll receive the senator as soon as he arrives. After the adjutant left, Marcus turned to Lucilia, who had been reviewing supply manifests in the corner of the office. It seems our next meaningless battle may come sooner than expected. You think the senator brings orders for a new campaign? Lucilia asked, setting aside the scrolls. Senators don't travel to frontier fortresses to discuss supply chains or garrison rotations, Marcus replied. He's here because someone in Rome sees an opportunity for glory, which invariably means blood. Lucilia considered this. The recent engagement with the Chatty could hardly be reported as a significant victory. Perhaps he brings new strategic directives. Perhaps, Marcus agreed, though his tone suggested he expected something less rational. In any case, we shall soon find out. The senator's carriage arrived at the fortress gates with considerable fanfare, accompanied by a detachment of Praetorian guards, the emperor's elite bodyguards, whose presence at a frontier outpost was unusual and somewhat alarming. Marcus received the distinguished visitor in the fortress's modest audience chamber, which had been hastily decorated with military standards and the few luxury items available. Senator Gaius Petronius Longus was a corpulent man in his 50s, with the florid complexion of someone who enjoyed the finest wines and richest foods Rome had to offer. His toga was of the highest quality, and jeweled rings adorned his fingers. Despite his soft appearance, his eyes were sharp and calculating. General Marcus Valerius Aquila, the senator declared after the formal greetings had been exchanged. Your reputation precedes you, as does yours, Senator, Marcus replied neutrally. To what do we owe the honor of your presence at our humble outpost? The senator smiled, settling himself into the most comfortable chair available. Direct, as a military man should be. Very well, I come bearing both news and orders from Rome. He gestured to a servant, who presented him with a cup of wine. After taking a sip and grimacing slightly at the quality, he continued. The emperor is most concerned about the security of the northern frontier. Reports of increasing Germanic unity under a new confederation of tribes have reached the Senate. Marcus kept his face impassive, though internally he noted that no such confederation existed, at least not according to any intelligence his scouts had gathered. Our recent engagement with the Chatty showed no evidence of unusual coordination among the tribes. Ah, yes, your recent engagement. The senator's tone made it clear what he thought of the battle's outcome. A tactical repositioning, I believe you called it in your report, an accurate description of a limited conflict with limited objectives, Marcus replied, refusing to be baited. The senator waved a dismissive hand. Water under the bridge, General. What matters is the future. The Emperor requires a decisive victory against these barbarians, something that will demonstrate Rome's power and discourage any thoughts of unified resistance. And what specific target has the Emperor identified for this decisive victory? Marcus asked, already dreading the answer. Intelligence suggests that the tribal leaders will be gathering for a religious ceremony at the sacred grove near the Weser River in 30 days' time, the senator explained, leaning forward with an expression of calculated intensity. The Emperor believes this presents an unprecedented opportunity to eliminate the barbarian leadership in a single stroke. Marcus exchanged a glance with Lucilia, who stood slightly behind him. Her expression mirrored his own skepticism. The sacred grove was deep in Germanic territory, at least 7 days' march from their current position. An attack on a religious gathering would unite the tribes in ways that conventional military actions never could. And the timing, 30 days, was suspiciously convenient. May I ask the source of this intelligence? Marcus inquired carefully. The senator's smile tightened. That is not your concern, General. Your concern is executing the Emperor's orders. Of course, Marcus replied smoothly. I merely wish to ensure the success of such an important mission by verifying all available information. The information comes from the highest levels of imperial intelligence, the senator said, his tone making it clear that the matter was not open for discussion. The Emperor has authorized me to provide whatever resources you require for this operation. He considers it of the utmost importance. Marcus nodded, recognizing the political reality. Whatever the truth behind this intelligence, he was now being ordered to attack a sacred site during a religious ceremony, an action that violated not only military common sense, but also Rome's usual policy of religious tolerance toward conquered peoples. "I will begin preparations immediately," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Though I must note that such an operation carries significant risks and will require careful planning." "Naturally," the senator agreed with false heartiness. "That's why the Emperor has such confidence in you, General. Your experience and caution are well known in Rome." The implied criticism was not lost on Marcus. His reputation for avoiding unnecessary casualties and preferring strategic positioning to glorious but costly battles had not endeared him to the more aggressive factions in Rome. "The Legion will not fail in its duty," Marcus replied formally. "Will you be accompanying us on this campaign, Senator?" The senator laughed, as if the very idea was absurd. "I'm afraid affairs of state require my return to Rome. However, I will be sending my nephew, Tribune Quintus Petronius, to observe and report directly to the Emperor on the Legion's glorious victory." And there it was, the true purpose of this decisive battle. The senator's nephew would witness a great Roman triumph, report it in heroic terms to the Emperor, and advance both his own career and his uncle's influence. That the triumph would be built on the bodies of legionaries and innocent Germanic worshippers was, apparently, a secondary consideration. After the senator departed to his quarters, promising to provide written orders in the morning, Marcus remained in the audience chamber with Lucilia. "There is no tribal gathering," he said flatly once they were alone. "At least, none that our scouts have reported. And if there were, attacking a religious ceremony would be—" Lucilia began. "A catastrophic mistake," Marcus finished for her. "It would unite every tribe from here to the Baltic Sea against Rome. We'd be facing a genuine rebellion instead of the usual border skirmishes." "Then what is the senator's true purpose?" Lucilia asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer. "Politics," Marcus replied with undisguised disgust. "His nephew needs a military triumph to advance his career. The senator needs influence with the Emperor, and we are to provide the bodies necessary to secure both." Lucilia paced the small room, her mind working rapidly. "We could send scouts to verify the intelligence. If we can prove there is no gathering, the senator's intelligence will prove correct regardless of reality," Marcus interrupted. "If we send scouts who report no gathering, the senator will simply claim our scouts missed it or that the location changed. The outcome is predetermined, Lucilia. The only variable is how many men we lose achieving it. So we march to another battle that changes nothing, except this time we attack innocent worshippers rather than warriors." Lucilia's voice rose slightly with indignation. "That," Marcus said grimly, "is exactly what Rome is ordering us to do." The news of the upcoming campaign spread quickly through the fortress. For the common soldiers, it meant the usual preparations, checking equipment, sharpening weapons, making peace with whatever gods they worshipped. Few questioned the purpose or wisdom of their orders. That was not a soldier's place. In the barracks, Faustus sat on his bunk, carefully wrapping a protective leather cover around the hilt of his gladius. His leg was healing well, and he would be fit for full duty by the time the Legion marched. Whether that was fortunate or not, he was no longer certain. "A sacred grove," Titus mused from the next bunk, where he was mending a tear in his tunic. "That's a new low, even for Rome." "What do you mean?" Faustus asked, looking up from his work. Titus glanced around to ensure no officers were within earshot. "The Germanic tribes believe their gods dwell in certain sacred places. Groves, springs, mountains. To attack such a place during a ceremony it's like attacking a temple in Rome during a sacrifice to Jupiter. Faustus frowned, troubled by the comparison. Surely we wouldn't attack civilians during worship. It must be a gathering of war chiefs planning their next raid. Titus gave him a look that managed to be both pitying and approving. You still want to believe the best, don't you? Despite everything you've seen. I want to believe there's a purpose, Faustus admitted. That we're not just killing and dying for nothing. There is a purpose, Titus said, returning to his mending. Just not one they tell you in the recruitment speeches. The purpose is to advance careers in Rome, to justify taxes and levies, to maintain the myth of the ever-expanding, ever-victorious empire. Faustus was quiet for a long moment, contemplating this cynical but increasingly plausible explanation. Then why do you stay? He finally asked. Why not desert or refuse to fight? Titus tied off his thread and bit it with his teeth before answering. Because despite everything, these men, he gestured around the barracks, are my brothers, and in this mad, pointless world, that counts for something. Faustus nodded slowly, beginning to understand. The individual battles might be meaningless in the grand sweep of history, but the bonds formed among those who fought them, those were real and lasting. In the days that followed, the fortress buzzed with preparations for the campaign. Maps were studied, supplies were gathered, and training intensified. Senator Petronius remained in his quarters most of the time, emerging only for formal meals where he regaled the officers with tales of Rome's political intrigues, stories that highlighted his own importance and connections to the emperor. His nephew, Tribune Quintus, proved to be a different sort of man entirely. Young, eager, and completely inexperienced in military matters, he followed Marcus everywhere, asking endless questions about strategy and tactics. His earnestness might have been endearing had it not been so clear that he viewed the upcoming campaign solely as a means to advance his political ambitions. The sacred grove is said to be surrounded by ancient oaks, some older than Rome itself, Quintus remarked during an officers' meeting. I shall bring a branch back as a souvenir. Perhaps the emperor would appreciate such a token from a conquered barbarian holy site. The veteran officers exchanged glances, but said nothing. Marcus, for his part, continued reviewing the march route as if he hadn't heard the comment. Lucilia, however, couldn't maintain her silence. The grove is sacred to the Germanic peoples because they believe their ancestors' spirits dwell there. Desecrating it would be viewed as an attack on their very identity as a people. Quintus looked at her with surprise, clearly unused to being contradicted, especially by a woman. All the more reason to demonstrate Rome's superiority, wouldn't you say? These barbarians must learn that their primitive superstitions cannot stand against civilization. Is that what we're bringing them? Civilization? Lucilia asked, her tone carefully neutral despite the challenge in her words. An uncomfortable silence fell over the meeting. Even Marcus looked up from his maps, watching the exchange with interest. Of course, Quintus replied, though he seemed less certain now. Rome brings law, order, roads, aqueducts, all the benefits of civilization to these backward peoples. And how many of those have we built in the territories we've been fighting over for generations? Lucilia pressed. Where are the aqueducts, the roads, the temples and forums in these northern lands? All I see are military outposts designed to extract resources and project power. Tribune Quintus flushed, unused to having his assumptions challenged so directly. This is bordering on sedition, General Marcus. I would advise you to control your strategist's tongue before she says something truly regrettable. All eyes turned to Marcus, who had observed the exchange with an unreadable expression. After a moment of tense silence, he spoke in a measured tone. Strategist Lucilia raises valid military concerns about the consequences of desecrating a sacred site. As officers of Rome, we must consider all potential outcomes of our actions, including the likelihood of increased resistance following such a provocative act. It was a diplomatic response that neither endorsed Lucilia's implied criticism nor condemned it. The meeting continued with a discussion of supply lines and march formations, the more controversial subject temporarily set aside. Later, in the privacy of the command office, Marcus addressed Lucilia directly. "You're becoming careless with your words, strategist. The Tribune may be young and foolish, but his uncle has the Emperor's ear." "I spoke only the truth," Lucilia replied, though her defiant tone was tempered by the knowledge that he was right. "Truth is a luxury in wartime," Marcus said, sorting through intelligence reports on his desk, particularly when dealing with political appointees. Lucilia paced the small office, unable to contain her frustration. "How can you remain so calm? We're being ordered to commit what amounts to a sacrilege against an innocent people solely to advance a senator's nephew's career." "Because I have been here before," Marcus replied, looking up at her with weary eyes. "Many times. And I have learned that direct opposition leads only to replacement by someone who will follow orders without question. Someone who would lead these men into an even more disastrous engagement. So we simply obey, march north and slaughter people at prayer." Marcus was silent for a long moment, studying a map of the Northern Territories spread across his desk. Finally, he spoke in a voice so low that Lucilia had to lean forward to hear him. "There are ways to follow orders while minimizing their harm, but such methods require discretion and patience, qualities you would do well to cultivate." Before Lucilia could press for clarification, there was a knock at the office door. A messenger entered, saluting sharply. "General, scout reports from the Northern Territories. For your eyes only." Marcus took the sealed document, dismissed the messenger, and broke the wax seal. As he read, his expression remained neutral, but Lucilia, who had spent enough time with him to recognize his subtle reactions, noted a slight tension around his eyes. "Significant news?" she asked when he had finished reading. "Perhaps," Marcus replied, carefully placing the report in a drawer rather than the usual file for scout information. "It seems our scouts have observed unusual movement among the Germanic settlements. Small groups traveling eastward, away from the sacred grove." "Eastward? Not toward the grove for the supposed gathering?" "Indeed." Marcus's expression gave nothing away. "Most curious. Should we inform the senator?" Lucilia asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The senator has made it clear that his intelligence supersedes our own," Marcus replied smoothly. "We will continue preparations as ordered." The next morning, Marcus called for Centurion Titus to report to his office. The weathered veteran arrived promptly, standing at attention before the general's desk. "At ease, Centurion," Marcus said. "I have a special assignment for you and a small detachment. It requires discretion and experience, qualities I'm told you possess in abundance." Titus relaxed his stance slightly, but remained professionally alert. "I serve at the general's pleasure." "Good." Marcus handed him a sealed scroll. "You will take 5 men, choose those you trust implicitly, and proceed to these coordinates. Your official orders are to establish an advance observation post in preparation for the main force's arrival." "And my unofficial orders, General?" Titus asked, demonstrating the perception that had contributed to his long survival on the frontier. Marcus met his gaze directly. "To observe and report accurately what you find there, regardless of how it may differ from expectations." Titus nodded once, understanding perfectly. "When do we depart?" "Before dawn tomorrow." "Select your men carefully, Centurion. This mission requires both discretion and integrity." "I know just the men, sir." Titus hesitated, then added, "Including a promising young legionary named Faustus. His leg has healed well, and he shows unusual perception for one so new to the frontier." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You vouch for this Faustus?" "I do, sir." "He sees clearly and speaks honestly, rare qualities in the legions these days." "Very well, but ensure he understands the importance of discretion." After Titus departed, Lucilia emerged from the adjoining room where she had been reviewing maps. "You're sending an independent scouting party to verify the senator's intelligence." I'm establishing an advance observation post, as any prudent commander would do before marching into potentially hostile territory, Marcus corrected her mildly. If their observations happen to provide clarity regarding certain claims, that is merely a fortunate coincidence. And if they find no evidence of a tribal gathering, then we will have decisions to make, Marcus replied, his expression grave. Difficult ones. The next morning, long before the fortress stirred to life, Titus led his small detachment through a side gate and into the misty pre-dawn landscape. Faustus walked beside him, along with 4 veteran legionaries chosen for their reliability and discretion. The general was unusually specific about our mission, Faustus observed quietly, once they were well away from the fortress. Normally, advanced scouts are given more flexibility in choosing their position. Titus gave him an appraising look. Observant. The general has his reasons, which will become clear in time. For now, we follow orders and keep our eyes open. The small group traveled light, carrying only essential equipment and rations for 10 days. They moved quickly across the countryside, avoiding main paths and settlements. By sunset, they had covered nearly 20 miles, making camp in a small copse of trees that provided both concealment and a good view of the surrounding terrain. As they sat around a small, carefully shielded fire, eating a simple meal of hard bread and dried meat, Faustus studied the veteran legionaries who had been selected for this mission. All were older men, with at least 10 years of service each. Men who had seen enough battles to know the difference between glory and reality. Why us? He finally asked Titus. For this mission, I mean. There are dozens of scouts more experienced than I am. Titus took a swig from his water skin before answering. Because the general needs men who will report what they actually see, not what they think he wants to hear, or what the senator wants him to hear. You think the intelligence about the tribal gathering is false? One of the other legionaries asked, his voice low despite their isolation. I think, Titus replied carefully, that we are to verify it with our own eyes. Nothing more, nothing less. The journey continued for 4 more days, taking them deep into territory that, while nominally under Roman control, was rarely patrolled by the legions. The landscape changed gradually, the cultivated fields giving way to denser forests and wilder terrain. Signs of human habitation became scarcer, the occasional hunting camp or isolated farmstead rather than proper settlements. On the 5th day, they approached the coordinates specified in their orders. The Sacred Grove, according to both Roman intelligence and local knowledge, lay in a valley surrounded by ancient oak trees, with a small stream running through its center. It was said to be one of the oldest religious sites of the Germanic peoples, predating even their earliest recorded histories. Titus called a halt while they were still several miles away. We'll approach with extreme caution from here. If there is indeed a gathering of tribal leaders, they'll have sentries posted. At these, the group split into pairs, approaching the sacred site from different directions to maintain multiple observation points. Faustus found himself partnered with Titus, moving silently through the dense underbrush as they had been taught. The forest here was old, the trees massive and widely spaced, with a canopy that blocked much of the sunlight. It had an undeniably sacred feeling, a sense of age and permanence that made even the Roman fortress seem temporary by comparison. As they neared the grove, Titus signaled for complete silence, communicating only with hand gestures. They moved from tree to tree, using each massive trunk as cover. Finally, they reached a position that offered a clear view of the grove itself, while keeping them hidden among the shadows of the forest edge. Faustus felt his breath catch at the sight. The sacred grove was more beautiful than he had imagined. A perfect circle of impossibly ancient oak trees surrounding a meadow of lush grass and wildflowers. In the center stood a rough stone altar, weathered by centuries of use. The small stream Titus had mentioned ran along one edge, its water clear and sparkling in the dappled sunlight that broke through the canopy. But what struck Faustus most forcefully was what was not there. People. The grove was entirely empty of human presence. No tribal leaders, no worshippers, no preparations for any kind of ceremony. "There's no one here," he whispered, unable to contain his surprise despite the order for silence. Titus nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "And based on the condition of the grass and the altar, no one has been here recently. Certainly no large gathering." They observed for several more hours, maintaining their hidden position and watching for any sign of approaching tribespeople. None came. As the sun began to set, they withdrew carefully to rendezvous with the other pairs at their predetermined meeting point. The reports from the other observation teams confirmed their findings. The sacred grove was empty and had been for some time. There were no signs of preparations for a gathering, no evidence of recent religious ceremonies, and no indication that tribal leaders were traveling toward the site. "So the senator's intelligence was false," one of the legionaries said, as they made camp that night several miles from the grove to avoid detection. "Or mistaken," Titus corrected, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Either way, our duty is clear. We report what we observed, nothing more." "And then what?" Faustus asked. "The Legion is already preparing for a major campaign based on this intelligence." Titus stared into the small fire, his weathered face grave in the flickering light. "That, young Faustus, will be for the general to decide." The return journey was made with greater speed, the scouts now familiar with the terrain and motivated by the importance of their information. They arrived at the fortress 8 days after their departure, weary but determined. Titus reported directly to General Marcus, bringing Faustus with him as a corroborating witness. In the privacy of the command office, with only Lucilia present, they described what they had found, or rather, what they had not found. "You're certain?" Marcus asked when they had finished their report. "No signs of recent use? No indications of preparations for a gathering?" "None, General," Titus confirmed. "The grove appears to have been undisturbed for at least several weeks, possibly longer." "And the surrounding settlements?" "Going about their normal activities," Faustus added. "Farming, hunting, trading. We observed no unusual movements of warriors or tribal leaders." Marcus exchanged a glance with Lucilia, whose expression was a mixture of vindication and concern. "Thank you for your thorough report, Centurion. You and your men have performed admirably. You're dismissed, but maintain discretion regarding your findings." After Titus and Faustus had left, Marcus sat heavily in his chair, the weight of command visible in his posture. "So there is no gathering. No conspiracy of tribal leaders. No threat requiring immediate military action." "As we suspected," Lucilia said, pacing the small office. "The question now is, what do we do with this information?" "Indeed." Marcus stared at the map on his desk, where the sacred grove was marked with a small X. "The senator's orders come directly from the emperor, or so he claims. To disobey would be treasonous, and to obey would be to attack innocent civilians based on false intelligence, solely to advance a political career," Lucilia countered. "Is that not also a betrayal of Rome's principles?" Marcus gave a bitter laugh. "Rome's principles are whatever those in power declare them to be. Always have been. So we march north and attack an empty grove, or wait until worshippers arrive for their normal ceremonies and slaughter them to satisfy a senator's ambition." Lucilia's voice rose slightly with indignation. "Neither," Marcus said, his tone suddenly firm. "There is another way." Before he could elaborate, there was a knock at the door. Without waiting for a response, Senator Petronius entered, followed by his nephew Tribune Quintus. Both looked pleased with themselves. "General Marcus, I trust preparations for our glorious campaign are proceeding apace," the senator boomed, helping himself to a cup of wine from the carafe on a side table. "They are, Senator," Marcus replied, smoothly sliding the scout report under other papers on his desk. "Though we've encountered some logistical challenges." The senator waved a dismissive hand. "Nothing the famed 10th Legion can't overcome, I'm sure. My nephew is most eager to witness Roman military efficiency firsthand." "Indeed," Tribune Quintus added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I've been studying the maps. The Sacred Grove seems an ideal location for a decisive engagement. Limited escape routes for the barbarians. Clear lines of sight for our archers. Your tactical assessment is impressive for one with limited military experience, Marcus said, his tone neutral, despite the implied criticism. However, successful campaigns require more than favorable terrain. Intelligence, timing, supply lines, all must be precisely coordinated. The senator's smile tightened slightly. Are you suggesting a delay, General? The Emperor is most eager to receive news of a decisive victory against these troublesome tribes. Not a delay, Senator. A refinement of approach. Marcus stood, moving to the large map on the wall. Our latest intelligence suggests that the tribal gathering may occur not at the Sacred Grove itself, but at this location. He pointed to a spot approximately 15 miles east of the grove, near a Germanic settlement that was known to be hostile to Rome. Lucilia kept her face carefully blank, recognizing Marcus's strategy. The location he indicated was a known trading post, a place where merchants from various tribes gathered regularly, but which had no particular religious significance. A change in the barbarians' plans? The senator asked, studying the map with a frown. More likely our initial intelligence was incomplete, Marcus replied smoothly. These tribes are notoriously secretive about their religious practices. What matters is that this new location presents an even more favorable opportunity for a decisive engagement. Tribune Quintus approached the map, his expression dubious. But this isn't a sacred site. The symbolic impact of defeating them at their holy place would be much greater. True, Marcus conceded, but the practical impact of capturing or eliminating their leadership remains the same, and this location offers tactical advantages the Grove does not, primarily the element of surprise. They will not expect us to know of this meeting place. The senator and his nephew exchanged glances, clearly weighing the political value of the adjusted target. Finally, the senator nodded. Very well, General. I defer to your military expertise. So long as the outcome is the decisive victory the Emperor requires, the specific location is of secondary importance. You won't be disappointed, Senator, Marcus assured him with just the right blend of confidence and deference. The 10th Legion has never failed Rome. After the senator and his nephew departed, Lucilia looked at Marcus with new respect. You diverted them from the Sacred Grove without directly challenging their intelligence. Clever. Politics requires a different kind of strategy than battlefield tactics, Marcus replied, returning to his desk. Now we must ensure that when we reach this trading post, there is indeed something there that can be presented as a gathering of tribal leaders. How? We can't control the movements of Germanic tribesmen. No, Marcus agreed. But we can control what we claim to see and how we respond to it. He pulled out a fresh parchment and began writing. I'm ordering additional scouts to monitor the trading post. When we arrive with the main force, they will report observing suspicious gatherings of tribesmen who dispersed upon detecting Roman presence. A phantom enemy, Lucilia said, understanding dawning. We claim victory over a gathering that scattered before battle could be joined. Precisely. The senator gets his report of a successful operation against a tribal conspiracy. The emperor receives news of Roman dominance on the frontier, and no innocent blood is shed at a sacred site. And the Legion, Marcus's expression hardened. The Legion will conduct a thorough sweep of the area, burn a few abandoned hunting camps as evidence of our decisive action, and return having suffered minimal casualties from a few inevitable skirmishes with hunting parties or outlying settlements. A battle that changes nothing, Lucilia said softly, echoing Marcus's words from their first conversation. Except that it prevents a massacre, Marcus replied. Sometimes, Lucilia, winning means finding the least damaging way to lose. The Legion marched north 5 days later, a column of 5,000 men stretching nearly a mile along the rough frontier road. Standards flew proudly at the front, where Marcus rode alongside Senator Petronius and Tribune Quintus, both now dressed in ornate military garb, despite having never seen actual combat. The march would take 6 days to reach the trading post that Marcus had identified as the new target. 6 days of disciplined movement through increasingly wild territory, with scouts ranging ahead and to the flanks, watching for any sign of Germanic resistance. Faustus marched with his century, his recently healed leg occasionally aching, but otherwise causing him no difficulties. The weight of his equipment, shield, gladius, javelin, armor, helmet, tools and rations, was substantial, but months of training and his recent combat experience had hardened him. He was no longer the naive recruit who had joined the legions seeking glory. Titus walked beside him, as always, the veteran's steady presence a reassuring constant. They had spoken little of their scouting mission since returning to the fortress, maintaining the discretion that Marcus had ordered, but Faustus had noted the changed marching orders with interest, recognizing that their findings had influenced the general's strategy. "We're not going to the Grove," he observed quietly on the second day of the march, as they took a brief rest by a small stream. "No," Titus confirmed, refilling his water skin. "Apparently the gods have decided to meet elsewhere, or someone has decided for them." Faustus glanced toward the head of the column, where the general rode with the senatorial party. "Do you think there will be a battle at all?" Titus snorted softly. "There's always a battle, boy. The question is, who will be fighting it, and for what purpose?" He capped his water skin and stood. "Come on. The centurion is giving the signal to resume marching." The column continued north, passing through lands that showed increasing signs of Germanic presence, small settlements visible in the distance, fields cultivated in the tribal style, occasional hunting parties observed watching the Roman advance from afar. Yet there was no organized resistance, no gathering of warriors to oppose them. The tribes, it seemed, were content to monitor this latest Roman incursion without directly challenging it. On the evening of the 4th day, as the legion made camp in a defensible position near a small river, Marcus called his senior officers to his tent for a council. Maps were spread across a portable table, illuminated by oil lamps that cast long shadows across the canvas walls. "We are here," Marcus indicated their position on the map. "The trading post is 2 days' march north. Our scouts report increased activity in the area, small groups of tribesmen converging from different directions." Tribune Quintus leaned forward eagerly. "The gathering our intelligence predicted, excellent. We shall catch them in the midst of their conspiracy." Marcus exchanged a brief glance with Lucilia before continuing. "The situation requires careful handling. A direct assault might allow many of the tribal leaders to escape. I propose dividing our forces. The main body will approach from the south, while smaller detachments circle to cut off escape routes to the east and west." The officers nodded their approval of this standard tactic. Senator Petronius, who had been unusually quiet during the march, finally spoke up. "And what of prisoners, General? The Emperor would be most interested in questioning captured tribal leaders." "We will make every effort to take high-value captives," Marcus assured him, though all his veteran officers understood the implicit message. In the chaos of battle, distinguishing high-value targets from ordinary tribesmen would be conveniently difficult. "However, our primary objective remains the disruption of this gathering and the demonstration of Roman power on the frontier." The meeting continued with discussions of specific unit assignments and contingency plans. Throughout, Marcus maintained the fiction that they were preparing for a significant engagement against a real gathering of tribal leaders. Only Lucilia and a few senior officers who had served with Marcus for years recognized the careful way he was managing expectations while preparing for what would likely be a limited skirmish at most. As the officers dispersed to relay orders to their units, Senator Petronius lingered, refilling his wine cup from Marcus's personal supply, a presumption the general noted but did not comment on. "You seem remarkably confident, General," the senator observed. These northern campaigns can be unpredictable, I'm told. Experience brings its own kind of confidence, Senator, Marcus replied carefully. The 10th Legion has fought these tribes for generations. We understand their methods and their weaknesses. Yes, generations of conflict with little permanent resolution, the senator mused, swirling his wine. One might almost think it serves certain interests to maintain this state of perpetual warfare rather than achieving a final victory. The implied criticism was clear, but Marcus refused to be baited. The frontier is a complex environment, Senator. Complete pacification would require resources far beyond what Rome has allocated to this region. Perhaps, the senator conceded with a thin smile, or perhaps it requires generals with the will to achieve decisive results, regardless of the cost. There are always costs in war, Senator, Marcus replied, his tone cooling slightly. The true skill lies in ensuring those costs serve Rome's actual interests, not merely the appearance of them. The senator's eyes narrowed at this subtle rebuke, but before he could respond, Tribune Quintus entered the tent, excited and slightly breathless. Uncle, General, the scouts have returned with new information about the gathering. It appears even larger than we anticipated. Senator Petronius's expression shifted to one of satisfaction. Excellent news. It seems our intelligence was even more accurate than we knew. The Emperor will be most pleased. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor despite his internal skepticism. He had given no such orders to the scouts, which meant either they were reporting what they thought their superiors wanted to hear, or someone, likely the senator, had influenced their reporting. I look forward to reviewing their findings, Marcus said neutrally. If you'll excuse me, Senator, I must consult with my staff regarding this new information. After the senator and his nephew departed, Lucilia entered from the adjoining section of the command tent, where she had been working on supply distribution. I overheard, she said without preamble. The scouts reported a larger gathering. That contradicts everything our advance team observed. Indeed, Marcus agreed, his expression grim. It seems the senator is ensuring his narrative prevails regardless of reality. Summon Centurion Titus to me immediately, discreetly. Today, when Titus arrived a short time later, Marcus wasted no time on formalities. The official scout report now claims a large gathering at the trading post. Did you brief your men to maintain silence about what you actually observed at the Sacred Grove? Yes, General, Titus confirmed, and they are all reliable men who understand the importance of discretion. Good. Because it appears we now have two conflicting sets of intelligence, the reality you observed and the fiction the senator requires for his political purposes. Titus's weathered face revealed nothing. How would the general like us to proceed? Marcus considered for a moment. Continue as planned. We will reach the trading post in 2 days. By then, I expect the senator's intelligence will have evolved to match whatever we actually find there, even if that's nothing more than ordinary tribal commerce. And the Sacred Grove, Titus asked. There are rumors among the men about the original target. The Sacred Grove is no longer our concern, Marcus stated firmly. Make that clear to your men. Our objective is the trading post, where we will engage any hostile forces we encounter and then return to our fortress, having successfully completed our mission. After Titus departed, Lucilia looked at Marcus with concern. The senator is manipulating the intelligence to ensure his predetermined outcome. If we arrive at the trading post and find nothing significant, he'll claim the tribes were warned of our approach and dispersed. Precisely, Marcus agreed. Which is why we must ensure there is something at the trading post that can plausibly be described as a thwarted gathering. How? A grim smile crossed Marcus's face. By sending word ahead of us, not to warn innocent civilians, of course, that would be treasonous, merely to test the communications networks of the region, to see how quickly information travels among the tribes. Lucilia understood immediately. If word of our approach reaches the trading post in advance, any tribespeople there will have departed before we arrive. A regrettable failure of operational security, Marcus said with mock solemnity, for which I will naturally take full responsibility in my report to Rome. The plan was set in motion that night. Trusted scouts were dispatched ostensibly to gather final intelligence, but with instructions to be careless enough in their movements to be observed by Germanic hunters or sentries. The message would spread quickly among the tribal networks, Romans approaching in force, heading toward the trading post. The next day, the legion continued its march north, maintaining the appearance of a force preparing for a significant engagement. Senator Petronius and Tribune Quintus rode near the front, periodically engaging Marcus in discussions of strategy and the anticipated glory of the coming battle. Marcus participated in these conversations with professional courtesy, neither encouraging their delusions nor directly challenging them. In the ranks, Faustus marched with his century, increasingly aware of the political machinations taking place around what was supposed to be a military operation. Titus had shared nothing explicit, maintaining his ordered discretion, but his occasional comments and the knowing looks exchanged among veteran soldiers told Faustus enough to understand that this campaign was not what it appeared to be. "Will there be a real battle?" he asked Titus during a brief rest period. The veteran shrugged. "There's always fighting on the frontier. Whether it's a battle worth recording in the histories is another matter entirely." "Then what's the point of all this?" Faustus gestured toward the massive column of legionaries stretching ahead and behind them. 5,000 men marching for days. All the preparations and planning for what? Titus studied him for a moment, then replied in a low voice. "The point, boy, is that sometimes a general's greatest victory is the battle he chooses not to fight. Remember that, if you live long enough to command men yourself someday." The words stayed with Faustus as they resumed their march, a cryptic wisdom he couldn't fully decipher but sensed was important. The general was orchestrating something complex, a campaign that would satisfy Rome's political requirements while minimizing bloodshed. A battle that would change nothing, yet might prevent something worse. On the morning of the 6th day, the legion approached the trading post. Scouts reported that the site appeared largely abandoned, with only a few local tribesmen present, engaged in ordinary commerce. Most significantly, there was no sign of any large gathering or meeting of tribal leaders. Senator Petronius received this news with visible disappointment. "They must have been warned of our approach," he declared, exactly as Marcus and Lucilia had predicted. "A betrayal from within our own ranks, perhaps." "An unfortunate possibility," Marcus agreed, his tone neutral. "Or perhaps their own scouts observed our advance. The Germanic tribes are not without skill in woodland observation." "What matters," Tribune Quintus interjected, clearly trying to salvage the situation, "is that we have disrupted their gathering, prevented their conspiracy before it could fully form. That itself is a victory for Rome." "Indeed," Marcus concurred, grateful for the young tribune's face-saving interpretation. "And we shall demonstrate Rome's power by securing the trading post and conducting a thorough sweep of the surrounding area. Any tribal leaders who have not yet fled will be captured or eliminated." The operation that followed was a masterpiece of military theater. The legion descended on the trading post with full martial display, standards flying, armor gleaming, formations perfect. The few Germanic merchants present fled at their approach, abandoning their goods in their haste to escape. Marcus ordered the systematic search of the site and the surrounding woods, ensuring it was thorough enough to appear legitimate, while guaranteeing that no significant encounters with tribespeople would occur. A few abandoned hunting camps were discovered and burned. Some stores of weapons, ordinary hunting tools for the most part, were confiscated as evidence of martial preparations. By midday, the trading post was firmly under Roman control, with sentries posted and the legion's massive presence dominating the small clearing. Senator Petronius and Tribune Quintus surveyed the scene with a mixture of disappointment at the lack of actual fighting and determination to present the operation as a success. "We must prepare our report to the Emperor," the senator announced to Marcus as they stood in what had been the central market area of the trading post. "Rome will be pleased to hear that the barbarian conspiracy was disrupted before it could fully materialize." "As you say, Senator," Marcus replied, "the 10th Legion has fulfilled its mission. The tribal gathering has been addressed." "Indeed." The senator glanced around at the abandoned trading stalls, though I had hoped for more concrete results. Prisoners, identifiable tribal leaders. "The nature of frontier warfare is often fluid," Marcus offered diplomatically. "The tribesmen know these forests better than we do. When confronted with superior Roman force, they scatter rather than stand and fight." "A coward's tactic," Tribune Quintus declared with the confidence of youth and inexperience. "A survivor's tactic," Marcus corrected mildly, "and one that has allowed these tribes to resist total Roman domination for generations." Before the conversation could continue, a messenger approached at a run. "General, scouts report movement to the north, a small band of Germanic warriors, perhaps a hunting party that was separated from the main group." Marcus recognized the opportunity immediately. This was likely an ordinary hunting party unrelated to any gathering, but it provided the perfect scenario to create a tangible result for the senator's report. "Prepare a cohort for immediate pursuit," he ordered. "We'll capture these stragglers and determine what they know about the dispersed gathering." The operation that followed was swift and efficient. A cohort of experienced soldiers, led by a centurion who understood Marcus's unstated intentions, intercepted the Germanic hunting party. 8 men who were indeed simply returning from a hunting expedition, unaware of the Roman presence until it was too late. The brief skirmish resulted in 3 Germanic casualties and 5 prisoners, with minor injuries to 2 Roman soldiers. The prisoners, brought before Marcus and the senator, were presented as associates of the tribal leadership, who had been separated from the main gathering during the hasty dispersal. Senator Petronius examined the captives with satisfaction. "Excellent. These will serve as concrete evidence of our successful disruption of the barbarian conspiracy. The Emperor will be most pleased." "Indeed," Marcus agreed, though he noted with some discomfort how the prisoners, ordinary hunters with no political significance, were already being transformed in the official narrative into something they were not. "We shall question them thoroughly regarding the gathering and the tribal leadership." "See that you do," the senator replied. "I expect a full report before we return to the fortress. Tribune Quintus will assist in the interrogation, valuable experience for his future career." As the prisoners were led away, Lucilia approached Marcus with a concerned expression. "Those men are simple hunters, not tribal leaders or their associates." "I am aware," Marcus replied quietly, "and they will be treated accordingly, regardless of the senator's narrative. Once he has departed for Rome, they will be released, officially as a diplomatic gesture to prevent tribal unification against Rome. And in the meantime, Marcus said grimly, they will be questioned about fictional tribal gatherings they know nothing about, and their confusion will be interpreted as stonewalling or ignorance of the larger conspiracy." "This is wrong," Lucilia stated flatly. "Yes," Marcus agreed without hesitation. "But it is less wrong than the massacre at the sacred grove that would have occurred had we followed the original orders. The lesser evil is sometimes the only victory available to us, Lucilia." The next morning, the Legion began its return march to the fortress. The decisive operation had been completed, the tribal gathering disrupted, evidence of conspiracy gathered, and prisoners taken. By any official measure, the campaign had been a success. Senator Petronius and Tribune Quintus rode at the head of the column, already discussing how the report would be presented to the Emperor and what political advantages might be gained from this demonstration of Roman power on the frontier. Marcus rode slightly behind them, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. In the ranks, Faustus marched with his century, trying to make sense of what had occurred. They had marched for days, occupied an almost empty trading post, captured a few hunters, and were now returning as if some great victory had been achieved. The absurdity of it struck him forcefully. "Another glorious triumph for Rome," Titus remarked beside him, his tone dry. "Is it always like this?" Faustus asked. "Campaigns built on false intelligence, victories declared over enemies that don't exist?" "Not always," Titus admitted. "Sometimes there are real battles, real enemies, real victories and defeats, but often enough, yes, this is how Rome maintains the illusion of constant expansion and control, through battles that change nothing except in the official histories." Faustus fell silent, contemplating this. He had joined the legions seeking glory and purpose, only to discover that much of what Rome celebrated as military achievement was theatrical performance designed for political consumption in the capital. Yet something else had happened during this strange, anticlimactic campaign. Faustus had witnessed a different kind of leadership than he had expected, a general who found ways to fulfill his orders while minimizing bloodshed, who understood that sometimes the greatest victory was the battle not fought. "I think I understand now," he said after a long silence. "What you said about the general's greatest victory being the battle he chooses not to fight." Titus nodded approvingly. "You're learning, boy. Faster than most." As the legion continued its march south, Faustus looked ahead to where General Marcus rode, straight-backed and dignified despite the political farce he had been forced to orchestrate. There was honor there, Faustus realized, not in the glorious battles of the stories, but in the moral choices made within an immoral system, in finding ways to serve Rome's true interests rather than merely its political appetites. It was not the lesson he had expected to learn when he joined the legions, but perhaps it was the more valuable one. The return to the fortress took 5 days, slightly faster than the outward march due to the lack of anticipated battle to conserve energy for. Upon their arrival, Senator Petronius wasted no time in preparing his departure for Rome, eager to present his report of the successful operation to the emperor personally. In the command office, Marcus composed the official military report that would accompany the senator's political narrative. It was a masterpiece of careful wording, technically accurate in its description of the legion's movements and actions, while allowing for the senator's more expansive interpretation of their significance. "You're enabling his fiction," Lucilia observed, reading over the report. "I'm choosing my battles," Marcus corrected. "The senator will tell his tale regardless of what I write. By not directly contradicting him, I maintain credibility for when it truly matters, when actual lives hang in the balance. And the prisoners, the hunters who are being presented as tribal conspirators, will be released once the senator has departed, as I promised, a diplomatic gesture that coincidentally removes the only witnesses who might contradict the official narrative." Lucilia frowned, still troubled by the moral compromise. There must be a better way to serve Rome than this. "If you find it," Marcus replied with unexpected gentleness, "I hope you'll share it with me. After 23 years, I'm still searching." The following day, Senator Petronius and Tribune Quintus departed for Rome with great ceremony, carrying the triumphant reports of the legion's successful disruption of tribal conspiracy. The 5 Germanic prisoners were paraded before the senator's departure, evidence of Roman effectiveness that would soon be quietly released once the political theater had concluded. As the senatorial party disappeared down the southern road, Marcus turned to his adjutant. "Prepare orders for the legion's next movements. We'll establish outposts along the riverline as originally planned, the defensible position that actually secures the frontier rather than provocatively inserting ourselves between tribal settlements. The position strategist Lucilia recommended before the campaign," the adjutant noted. "Indeed," Marcus confirmed, "sometimes wisdom prevails if one is patient enough." That evening, as Faustus sat with Titus and other veterans in the fortress tavern, the conversation inevitably turned to the recent campaign. Many of the soldiers were puzzled by what had occurred. The march to an abandoned trading post, the capture of ordinary hunters presented as important prisoners, the declaration of victory without significant combat. Was it all for nothing then? A young legionary asked, echoing Faustus's own earlier questions. All that marching, all the preparations, not nothing, Titus replied, taking a long drink of his wine. We prevented something worse. What do you mean? Several soldiers asked, almost in unison. Titus glanced at Faustus, a silent communication passing between them, the shared knowledge of what the original target had been. Let's just say that sometimes a general must choose between following bad orders exactly or finding a way to follow them that does the least harm. Our general chose the latter, and in doing so prevented a massacre that would have united every tribe from here to the northern sea against Rome. The veterans nodded their understanding, while the younger soldiers looked confused but impressed. The reputation of General Marcus Valerius Aquila grew slightly that night, not for glorious victory in battle, but for wisdom in avoiding unnecessary bloodshed while still fulfilling Rome's strategic needs. For Faustus, the conversation cemented his new understanding of what it meant to serve Rome honorably on this distant frontier. It wasn't about the grand battles or territorial conquests he had imagined when joining the legions. It was about the small choices, the moral compromises, the quiet wisdom of knowing which battles to fight and which to avoid. In the months that followed, the 10th Legion established its defensive positions along the river line, as Marcus had ordered. Relations with the local tribes stabilized. Not peace exactly, but a mutual understanding of boundaries that reduced violent encounters. The sacred grove remained untouched, its ancient oaks continuing their silent witness to the passing of empires and the temporary nature of human conflicts. Senator Petronius's report to the emperor was received with moderate acclaim in Rome. One more successful operation against barbarian tribes on a distant frontier, soon forgotten amidst the constant flow of political intrigues and more pressing concerns closer to home. Tribune Quintus received a minor promotion for his battlefield experience, another step in his planned political ascent. And on the northern frontier, the endless cycle continued. Rome's legions maintained their presence, the Germanic tribes maintained their independence, and the borders shifted like sand dunes in a desert wind, advancing and retreating with each generation. Battles were fought that changed nothing in the grand sweep of history, yet meant everything to those who fought them and those who avoided fighting them when possible. For in the end, as Marcus had come to understand over his long career, the true history of Rome's empire was not written in the grand narratives of conquest and glory that filled the official histories. It was written in the small moments of humanity amidst inhumanity, of wisdom amidst folly, of moral choice amidst immoral systems. In the centurion who saved a young soldier's life on the battlefield. In the general who found ways to fulfill his orders while minimizing bloodshed. In the strategist who questioned the purpose behind the strategies. And perhaps Marcus reflected as he watched the sunset from the fortress wall one evening, that was enough. Not to change the course of empires or to secure one's name in the histories, but to maintain one's humanity in a system designed to sacrifice it for glory and power, to fight the battles that mattered, not for Rome, but for the people who comprised it, both citizen and barbarian alike. It was not the glorious purpose he had imagined as a young officer, but it was purpose nonetheless. And in a world of meaningless battles and forgotten victories, perhaps that quiet purpose was the only true triumph available, a battle for human dignity that, even if it changed nothing in the grand narrative of history, changed everything for those whose lives were spared by the battles not fought. As autumn descended upon the northern frontier, bringing with it chill winds and the first hints of the harsh winter to come, the 10th Legion settled into a routine of patrols, training, and fortification improvements. The peaceful interlude following the campaign to the trading post would not last long, however. Rome's appetite for military action on its frontiers was insatiable, a perpetual machine requiring constant feeding. 3 weeks after Senator Petronius's departure, a messenger arrived from Rome, bearing new orders sealed with the imperial insignia. Marcus received the document in his office, Lucilia standing nearby as he broke the seal and read the contents. His expression remained neutral, but Lucilia had learned to recognize the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated unwelcome news. "It seems our recent victory has impressed the Emperor," Marcus said, setting the parchment on his desk. "He believes the northern tribes have been sufficiently cowed by our show of force, and now presents an opportunity to expand Roman influence further east." "Another meaningless campaign?" Lucilia asked, approaching to examine the orders herself. "Worse, a diplomatic mission." Marcus pointed to a specific paragraph. "We are to escort an imperial envoy to the Marcomanni tribe to negotiate a treaty of alliance against their neighbors, the Quadi." Lucilia frowned. "The Marcomanni and Quadi have been allied for generations. They intermarry, share hunting grounds, and worship the same gods. Why would Rome think they could be turned against each other? Because someone in Rome with no understanding of tribal relationships beyond our borders has decided it would be strategically advantageous," Marcus replied, the rare hint of bitterness in his voice revealing his frustration. "The same someone who likely believes our recent campaign actually disrupted a significant tribal conspiracy. Senator Petronius, or someone influenced by his report." Marcus stood, moving to the map on his wall, where the territories of the various Germanic tribes were marked with different colors. Knowledge painfully accumulated through generations of conflict and occasional cooperation. "The Marcomanni will never betray their alliance with the Quadi, certainly not for promises from Rome, whom they have no reason to trust. So this diplomatic mission is doomed before it begins," Lucilia concluded. "Precisely. Yet we will undertake it with all appropriate ceremony. The envoy will make his offers. The Marcomanni will politely or not so politely decline. And we will return to report that, unfortunately, the barbarians proved too stubborn or too primitive to recognize the benefits of Roman friendship." "And the cycle continues," Lucilia murmured. "Indeed, though at least this folly is unlikely to result in significant bloodshed, provided we maintain proper protocols and don't allow the envoy to insult our hosts too grievously." Marcus refolded the orders and placed them in a drawer. "The envoy arrives in 2 weeks. Make preparations for an escort cohort, our best disciplined men, not our most aggressive." "Oui." As Lucilia departed to begin preparations, Marcus remained at the map, studying the intricate web of tribal territories, alliances and conflicts that defined the world beyond Rome's formal borders. After 23 years on this frontier, he understood these relationships better than most Romans ever would, certainly better than the politicians in Rome who designed grand strategies based on fundamental misunderstandings of the peoples they sought to subjugate or manipulate. The imperial envoy arrived precisely when expected, a man named Servius Galba Priscus, whose elaborate dress and numerous attendants spoke of wealth and connection rather than diplomatic experience. From their first meeting, Marcus recognized the type. A minor aristocrat granted an appointment through family connections, viewing this assignment as a stepping stone to more prestigious positions rather than a serious diplomatic endeavor. "General Marcus," Priscus greeted him with excessive warmth, as if they were old friends rather than new acquaintances. "Your recent success against the barbarian conspiracy has created the perfect opportunity for my mission. The tribes will be suitably impressed by Rome's strength and more amenable to our generous offer of alliance." Marcus bowed slightly, maintaining professional courtesy. "The northern tribes have their own perspective on recent events, Envoy Priscus. I would caution against assuming they view our actions as you do." Priscus waved a bejeweled hand dismissively. "Barbarians understand strength, General. That is the universal language. Now I have prepared gifts for the Marcomanni chief. Quality Roman wine, finely woven textiles, and a selection of metal implements far superior to their crude tools. These, combined with our offer of protection against their enemies, should prove most persuasive." "The Marcomanni already have enemies they wish protection from?" Marcus asked, knowing full well they did not. "All barbarians have enemies, General," Priscus replied with the confidence of complete ignorance. "It is their natural state. Our intelligence suggests tensions between the Marcomanni and the Quadi over hunting territories. We shall exploit these tensions to bring the Marcomanni into Rome's sphere of influence." Marcus exchanged a glance with Lucilia, who had maintained a carefully neutral expression throughout the conversation, despite the envoy's ridiculous assertions. Both knew that no such tensions existed. The Marcomanni and Quadi had resolved territorial disputes through intermarriage and shared governance of borderlands for at least 3 generations. "We shall depart in 3 days, Marcus said, choosing not to correct the envoy's misinformation. Experience had taught him that such men did not appreciate having their worldview challenged, particularly by a mere soldier. "The journey to the Marcomanni's main settlement will take approximately 1 week. "So long?" Priscus frowned. "I was assured this mission would be completed expeditiously." "The Marcomanni territory lies across difficult terrain," Marcus explained patiently, "and we must move at a pace suitable for diplomatic contact, not as a military force on campaign. The difference in approach is essential to the success of your mission." The envoy seemed less than pleased, but acquiesced with poor grace. As he departed with his attendants to settle into the quarters prepared for him, Lucilia finally allowed herself a small sigh of exasperation. "He knows nothing of the people he's meant to negotiate with," she observed. "Few in Rome do," Marcus replied. "Which is why these diplomatic initiatives invariably fail, and we return to the language Rome truly prefers: military force. Yet we participate in the charade." Marcus gave her a measured look. "We execute our orders as intelligently as possible, minimizing harm while fulfilling Rome's requirements. The alternative is to be replaced by those who would execute them unintelligently, maximizing harm without question." 3 days later, the diplomatic mission departed the fortress. One cohort of legionaries, approximately 480 men, provided escort for envoy Priscus and his dozen personal attendants. Marcus commanded personally, with Lucilia as his chief strategist and advisor. Among the selected legionaries were Titus and, at the veteran's recommendation, Faustus. "A diplomatic mission?" Faustus had questioned when Titus informed him of their assignment. "Why would they need so many soldiers for diplomacy?" "Because Rome's idea of diplomacy is showing enough force to make threats credible," Titus had replied with characteristic cynicism. "Besides, the general specifically requested reliable men who can maintain discipline even when provoked. Apparently, he expects this envoy to test our patience and professionalism." The column proceeded eastward at a deliberately measured pace, avoiding the appearance of a military advance while maintaining sufficient security. The autumn landscape was beautiful, despite the increasingly cold temperatures. Forests of oak and beech displaying brilliant red and gold foliage, morning frost creating sparkling displays across meadows, and the occasional deer or wild boar glimpsed among the trees. Envoy Priscus, however, saw none of this beauty. He complained incessantly about the pace, the accommodations at their nightly camps, the food, and the weather. His attendants, taking cues from their master, maintained a constant litany of minor grievances that tested the patience of even the most disciplined legionaries. "Is he always going to be like this?" Faustus asked Titus on the 3rd night as they stood guard duty outside the envoy's tent, from which emanated the sounds of Priscus berating a servant for some imagined failing. "Men like him come in 2 varieties," Titus replied quietly. "Those who improve when faced with real hardship, and those who become even more insufferable. He strikes me as the latter." Faustus nodded toward the east, where somewhere beyond the darkened forest lay the Marcomanni territory. Do you think this mission has any chance of success? Titus gave a soft, humorless laugh. The question assumes we share an understanding of what success means. For Rome, success is expanding influence and control. For the envoy, success is returning with a report that advances his career. For the general, I suspect success is completing this fool's errand without bloodshed or creating new enemies. And for us, boy, success is surviving another day with our honor intact. That's all soldiers like us can hope for. That, on the 7th day of their journey, the Roman column reached the border of Marcomanni territory, marked by a small river that glittered in the autumn sunlight. Marcus called a halt and dispatched scouts to make contact with the local border guards, following proper protocol for a diplomatic mission rather than a military advance. Envoy Priscus, resplendent in an elaborately embroidered toga that was entirely impractical for the frontier climate, watched with impatience. Why do we delay? We should proceed directly to their main settlement and present our terms. Diplomacy requires respecting local customs, Marcus explained with the patience of someone accustomed to educating the willfully ignorant. The Marcomanni, like most Germanic tribes, have specific protocols for receiving foreign delegations. Violating these would begin your negotiations at a significant disadvantage. The envoy sniffed dismissively, but did not countermand the general's approach. An hour later, the scouts returned, accompanied by 4 Marcomanni warriors on horseback, tall, powerfully built men with intricately braided hair and clothing made from well-tanned leather, adorned with bronze decorations. They carried spears, but held them vertically in the peace position. Marcus rode forward with Lucilia and a translator, meeting the Marcomanni representatives midway between the two groups. The conversation was brief and formal, conducted in the frontier trade language that combined elements of Latin, Germanic dialects, and Celtic vocabulary, a practical solution to communication developed through generations of trade and conflict. When Marcus returned to the main column, he addressed the envoy. The Marcomanni have granted us permission to proceed to their council hall. Their chief, Arminius, will receive us tomorrow at midday. We are to camp here tonight and will be escorted the remainder of the way in the morning. They presume to dictate terms to a representative of the emperor? Priscus huffed indignantly. They extend courtesy according to their customs, Marcus corrected firmly. Just as Rome has protocols for receiving foreign delegations, this is the nature of diplomacy between equal parties. Equal? The envoy's voice rose incredulously. These barbarians are hardly equal to Rome. Marcus fixed him with a steady gaze. For the purposes of this negotiation, Envoy Priscus, they must be treated as such. Otherwise, your mission is doomed before it begins. The evening passed tensely, with the envoy continuing to express his displeasure at every opportunity. The Marcomanni kept a respectful distance, maintaining a small observation post across the river, but otherwise leaving the Romans to their own devices. Marcus used the time to brief his officers on proper protocol for the following day, emphasizing the importance of disciplined behavior regardless of provocation. The Marcomanni will test us, he explained to the gathered centurions, not through direct challenge, but through small provocations, stares, whispers, perhaps spitting on the ground as we pass. Your men must understand that responding to such provocations would violate diplomatic protocol and potentially trigger a conflict we are specifically ordered to avoid. The officers nodded their understanding, though some looked less than pleased at the prospect of enduring insults without response. This was not what most had been trained for. Roman legionaries were conditioned to project power and respond decisively to any challenge to their authority or dignity. As the meeting concluded, Lucilia approached Marcus privately. The envoy remains a concern. He shows no understanding of or respect for Marcomanni customs. I am aware, Marcus replied grimly, which is why you will remain at his side throughout tomorrow's proceedings, providing guidance and, if necessary, discreetly correcting any egregious breaches of protocol. He's unlikely to welcome such guidance, Lucilia observed. No, but he may recognize the practical value of your knowledge, even if he disdains its source. Marcus sighed, a rare display of his inner weariness. In truth, Lucilia, this mission serves a purpose beyond its stated diplomatic objectives. It allows Rome to claim it attempted peaceful resolution before resorting to military action. When it inevitably fails, it will justify whatever campaign some ambitious general or politician wishes to launch next spring. So we participate in a predetermined failure? We execute our orders intelligently, ensuring that when this diplomatic theater concludes, both sides can walk away without loss of face or unnecessary bloodshed. Marcus's expression hardened slightly, and perhaps, if we are very fortunate, we might establish enough mutual respect with the Marcomanni that future interactions need not always lead to conflict. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost coating the grass and the breath of men and horses visible in the crisp air. The Roman column formed up in diplomatic procession rather than battle formation, the envoy's carriage at the center, surrounded by a guard of honor, with the remainder of the cohort following in ordered rows. It was a display of discipline and organization meant to impress rather than threaten. A delegation of 20 Marcomanni warriors arrived to escort them, led by a man introduced as Baldur, nephew to Chief Arminius. He was younger than the warriors from the previous day, perhaps 30, with keen, intelligent eyes that assessed the Roman formation with professional interest. "Your men are well disciplined," he commented to Marcus, in surprisingly good Latin, as they rode at the head of the procession. "Different from the last Roman force that entered our territory." "Oh, when was that?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. No official campaign had been directed against the Marcomanni in at least 5 years. 3 summers passed. A small force, perhaps 200 men. They claimed to be pursuing bandits, but seemed more interested in mapping our defensive positions. Baldur's tone was neutral, but the implication was clear. The Marcomanni were not naive about Rome's methods or intentions. "I was not aware of such an incursion," Marcus replied honestly. "It was not authorized by the frontier command." Baldur shrugged. "Rome's left hand often knows not what its right is doing, or so our traders tell us." He glanced back at the envoy's carriage. "This one, he comes to speak of alliance against the Quadi." Marcus managed to hide his surprise at the Marcomanni's accurate knowledge of their mission. "You seem well informed." A smile flickered across Baldur's face. "We barbarians have our methods. Your marketplaces have many ears, and gold loosens tongues." He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "Such an alliance would be like asking a man to cut off his own arm. The Quadi are our brothers." "I understand," Marcus replied carefully, aware he was engaged in diplomacy beyond his official capacity. "Yet I am bound to escort the envoy and allow him to present Rome's proposal." "Of course, and we are bound by hospitality to hear him, however absurd his offer." Baldur straightened in his saddle. "But I thought it might save time if we understood each other from the beginning, General Marcus." "Clarity is always valuable," Marcus acknowledged, developing a grudging respect for this forthright Germanic nobleman. Their journey continued through increasingly cultivated lands, fields recently harvested, orchards of apple and pear trees, and small settlements of well-constructed wooden buildings. The Marcomanni, it was clear, were not the primitive savages that Roman propaganda often depicted. Their society showed signs of sophisticated agriculture, craftsmanship, and social organization. By midday, they reached the main Marcomanni settlement, a substantial town of several hundred buildings centered around a large circular structure that served as their council hall. The Romans were led to a designated camping area nearby, where they were instructed to leave the majority of their force, while the envoy and a small honor guard would proceed to the diplomatic reception. Envoy Priscus emerged from his carriage, visibly displeased by the arrangements. "This is unacceptable. I am the Emperor's representative. I should be received immediately, not forced to wait while they prepare whatever primitive ceremony they deem appropriate." "This is their custom," Lucilia explained with admirable patience. "The delay honors you by demonstrating they take your arrival seriously enough to make proper preparations. To demand immediate audience would be seen as trivializing the importance of the meeting." The envoy looked unconvinced, but surrounded by unfamiliar territory and customs, reluctantly deferred to those with greater frontier experience. Marcus used the opportunity to select his honor guard, 20 men chosen for their discipline and self-control, including Titus and, at the veteran's insistence, Faustus. "The boy has a good eye and a calm head," Titus had argued when Marcus questioned Faustus's inclusion, "and he should see diplomacy at work, not just battle. It will make him a better officer someday." As the afternoon progressed, Marcomanni representatives brought food and drink to the Roman camp, freshly baked bread, smoked meats, and a honey-fermented beverage that the legionaries found surprisingly palatable. It was a gesture of hospitality that Marcus ensured was properly acknowledged and appreciated, though Envoy Priscus dismissed the offerings as barbarian fare and insisted on dining from his own provisions. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the settlement, a delegation arrived to escort the Roman envoy and his honor guard to the council hall. Marcus ensured his men were immaculately presented, armor polished, formations perfect, weapons carried respectfully rather than threateningly. The impression they made would significantly impact the reception of the envoy's message. The council hall proved impressive, even by Roman standards. A circular wooden structure nearly 100 feet in diameter, its high ceiling supported by massive oak pillars carved with intricate designs depicting the tribe's history and mythology. Benches arranged in concentric circles provided seating for what appeared to be the entire tribal leadership, at least 100 men and women of various ages, all dressed in their finest clothing, adorned with bronze, silver, and occasionally gold ornaments that spoke of considerable wealth. At the center stood Chief Arminius, a man in his 60s with a flowing white beard and penetrating blue eyes that had lost none of their sharpness with age. He wore a simple tunic of fine wool, distinguished from his counselors only by the torque of twisted gold around his neck and the quiet authority of his bearing. The formal introductions proceeded according to Marcomanni custom, with each side presenting their representatives and exchanging ritual phrases of peace and respect. Marcus noted with approval that his honor guard maintained perfect discipline throughout, showing neither discomfort at the unfamiliar protocols nor disdain for their barbarian hosts. Envoy Priscus, guided carefully by Lucilia, managed to navigate the initial formalities without major diplomatic incidents, though his expression frequently betrayed his impatience with what he clearly viewed as primitive ceremonies unworthy of his status. When the time came for the substantive discussions, Priscus stepped forward with a flourish of his toga and began his prepared speech. "Noble Arminius, leader of the Marcomanni, I bring greetings and an offer of friendship from the divine Emperor of Rome, ruler of the civilized world and protector of all peoples who wisely choose his beneficent alliance." The translator conveyed these words in the Marcomanni language, though Marcus noted that many of the tribal leaders, including Arminius himself, seemed to understand Latin well enough to react to the original rather than the translation. "Rome has observed with concern," Priscus continued, "the growing tensions between your people and your neighbors, the Quadi. Their encroachment on your traditional hunting grounds threatens your prosperity and security." At this, a murmur ran through the assembled council, with several members exchanging glances that clearly communicated their bewilderment at this claim. Arminius's expression remained neutral, though a slight tightening around his eyes suggested growing skepticism. The emperor, in his wisdom and generosity, offers you the protection of Roman arms against Quadi aggression," Priscus declared grandly. "In exchange for your oath of loyalty and modest annual tribute, Rome will ensure that your territories remain inviolate, your people secure, and your prosperity guaranteed." As the translator finished conveying this proposal, a profound silence fell over the council hall. Arminius studied the Roman envoy for a long moment before responding in perfect, if accented, Latin. "Rome's concern for our welfare is unexpected," he said carefully, "particularly as there are no tensions between the Marcomanni and the Quadi to resolve. Our peoples have lived in harmony for 3 generations, bound by marriage, shared hunting rights, and mutual defense agreements." Priscus faltered momentarily, clearly unprepared for such direct contradiction of his basic premise. "Perhaps you are unaware of recent developments," he suggested condescendingly. "Our intelligence indicates—" "Your intelligence is mistaken," Arminius interrupted firmly, but without hostility. "The chief of the Quadi sits among us today." He gestured to a powerfully built man of middle years seated nearby. "As he does at every council meeting, for he is my son-in-law and co-ruler of our shared borderlands." The Quadi chief nodded in confirmation, his expression a mixture of amusement and confusion at Rome's apparent ignorance of fundamental regional relationships. Priscus's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. He turned slightly toward Marcus, as if expecting the general to intervene or provide some military pressure to salvage the deteriorating diplomatic situation. Marcus maintained his professional, neutral expression, offering neither rescue nor confirmation of the envoy's flawed position. "I see," Priscus finally managed, gathering his dignity. "Perhaps there has been some misunderstanding. However, the Emperor's offer of alliance stands regardless. Rome's protection would benefit your people against any threat, not merely the Quadi." Arminius nodded thoughtfully. "And what threats does Rome perceive that would require our people to pay tribute for protection? We have maintained peace along our borders for many years, trading profitably with all our neighbors, including Roman settlements." "The world is full of dangers, Chief Arminius," Priscus replied, attempting to regain rhetorical momentum. "Migrating tribes from the east, raiders from the north, Rome alone has the military might to ensure lasting security." "Indeed," Arminius raised an eyebrow. "Yet it seems Rome itself has posed the greatest threat to stability in these lands in recent memory. Your legions cross our borders without permission, your scouts map our defenses, and now you offer protection we have not requested in exchange for tribute we have no reason to pay." The council murmured agreement, though notably without hostility or aggression. This was not a people preparing for conflict, but rather one pointing out the obvious inconsistencies in Rome's position. Priscus's diplomatic skills, limited as they were, failed him entirely at this point. "The Emperor's offer is generous beyond measure," he declared, his voice rising. "To reject it demonstrates a failure to appreciate Rome's power and benevolence, a failure that has led other, less fortunate tribes to regret their short-sightedness." As the translator hesitantly conveyed this thinly veiled threat, Marcus stepped forward smoothly, intervening before the situation deteriorated further. "Chief Arminius, if I may, the envoy speaks with the passion of one dedicated to his emperor's service. Perhaps it would be beneficial for both parties to consider these matters overnight, resuming our discussions tomorrow with fresh perspective." Arminius recognized the diplomatic rescue for what it was and responded in kind. "A wise suggestion, General Marcus. Hospitality demands we provide our guests comfortable accommodation and time to rest after their journey. We shall reconvene tomorrow when the sun reaches its zenith." The formal conclusion of the day's proceedings followed, with ritual exchanges of respect that somewhat smoothed over the diplomatic tension Priscus had created. As the Romans were escorted back to their camp, the envoy maintained a stony silence, his humiliation and anger palpable. Once they were alone in the command tent, however, His fury erupted. This is outrageous. These barbarians dare to contradict the Emperor's representative, to reject his generous offer without proper consideration. They must be taught respect. They spoke truth, Envoy Priscus, Marcus replied calmly. There is no conflict between the Marcomanni and Quadi. The basic premise of our diplomatic approach was flawed. Truth? What does truth matter in diplomacy? Priscus scoffed. The purpose was to separate these tribes, to bring the Marcomanni under Roman influence as a first step toward controlling this region. Whether they are currently allied with the Quadi is irrelevant to our objectives. Lucilia, standing nearby, could not contain herself. With respect, Envoy, diplomacy built on transparent falsehoods rarely succeeds, particularly with peoples who have extensive experience with Roman tactics. The Marcomanni and Quadi have dealt with Rome for generations. They understand our methods and motivations. I did not ask for your assessment, woman, Priscus snapped. Your role is to translate and facilitate, not to offer political opinions beyond your station. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his posture shifting subtly, but unmistakably. Strategist Lucilia speaks with my full authority and confidence, Envoy Priscus. Her assessment of the diplomatic situation is both accurate and valuable. I would advise you to consider it carefully. The envoy glared at them both, but recognizing he was operating in unfamiliar territory both literally and figuratively, moderated his tone slightly. What would you suggest then, General? I cannot return to Rome, having failed in my mission. I would suggest we acknowledge reality, Marcus replied. The Marcomanni and Quadi are not in conflict and cannot be turned against each other. However, both tribes have concerns about migrating peoples further east that might eventually pressure their borders. Perhaps a more limited agreement, mutual recognition and limited military cooperation against external threats, might be achievable. A compromise, Priscus said distastefully. Diplomacy often is, Marcus confirmed, and a limited success is preferable to an absolute failure, particularly when explaining results to the Emperor. Outside the command tent, Faustus stood guard alongside Titus, both having witnessed the diplomatic debacle in the council hall. That went poorly, Faustus observed quietly. About as expected, Titus replied with characteristic stoicism. Rome arrived with assumptions rather than understanding, and reality proved uncooperative. Will there be consequences? The envoy seemed angry enough to recommend military action. Titus shook his head slightly. The general will manage it. He'll find a way for the envoy to return to Rome with something he can present as partial success, while ensuring we don't create new enemies needlessly. Another meaningless diplomatic mission to add to our meaningless battles, Faustus mused. You're learning, boy, Titus approved. Though remember, meaningless to history doesn't mean meaningless to those involved. Every person who doesn't die because a battle is avoided or a treaty is signed, their lives mean something, even if the scrolls of history never record their names. The next day's negotiations proceeded more productively, though not in the direction originally intended by Rome. With Marcus and Lucilia subtly guiding the diplomatic approach, Envoy Priscus was persuaded to abandon the flawed premise of Marcomanni-Quadi conflict and instead focus on areas of potential mutual interest. By the day's end, a modest agreement had been reached. Not the tributary alliance Rome had sought, but a limited cooperation pact that established formal recognition between Rome and the two tribes, codified trading relationships, and included vague language about information sharing regarding threats from beyond the current frontier. It was, as Marcus had suggested, a limited success rather than an outright failure. Envoy Priscus, though clearly disappointed, recognized it as the best outcome available given the circumstances and his need to report some form of achievement to his patrons in Rome. As the Roman delegation prepared to depart the following morning, Chief Arminius approached Marcus privately, speaking in Latin to ensure their conversation remained between them. Your envoy came with false assumptions and insulting proposals. Yet you managed to create something constructive from the situation. That requires skill beyond the battlefield, General. I serve Rome's true interests as best I can, Marcus replied carefully. As do I serve my people's. Arminius nodded. Perhaps that is why we could find common ground. We both look beyond the immediate glory to the lasting consequences. A rare perspective, in my experience, Marcus acknowledged. Indeed. The Marcomanni chief glanced toward where Envoy Priscus was supervising the loading of his carriage, still maintaining the haughty distance he believed his station required. Your empire sends many representatives to our lands, some with swords, some with scrolls. Few understand what they see here. They look but do not perceive. A failure that costs both sides dearly, Marcus agreed. Remember this meeting, General Marcus, Arminius said, his weathered face solemn. When Rome eventually decides that treaties and trade are insufficient, when the drums of war sound again, as they inevitably will, remember that there was a moment when understanding was possible. I will remember, Marcus promised, recognizing the wisdom and the warning in the chief's words. The journey back to the fortress was uneventful, though marked by the envoy's continued sullen dissatisfaction with the outcome of his mission. He spent most of the time drafting and redrafting his report, attempting to present the limited agreement as a significant diplomatic achievement, while simultaneously suggesting that more direct methods might be necessary in the future to bring the stubborn barbarians fully under Roman control. For the legionaries providing escort, it was another mission completed, not glorious or decisive, but completed nonetheless. They had marched, stood guard, maintained discipline, and would return home without casualties or dishonor. In the grand calculus of frontier service, that constituted success of a sort. Upon their return to the fortress, life quickly resumed its normal rhythms. Envoy Priscus departed for Rome after only 2 days' rest, eager to present his version of events to his patrons before alternative reports could reach them. The 10th Legion returned to its routine of patrols, training, and fortification maintenance as autumn deepened toward winter. In the officers' dining hall one evening, Lucilia joined Marcus as he reviewed reports from the various outposts under his command. The envoy's mission changed nothing, she observed, continuing their ongoing philosophical conversation about the purpose of their service. The Marcomanni and Quadi remain independent. Rome's influence is no greater than before, and eventually some ambitious general or politician will order a military campaign regardless of treaties signed. True, Marcus acknowledged, setting aside his scrolls. Yet perhaps something did change, if only in small ways. Some of our men experienced diplomacy rather than combat, and saw that the barbarians are not the primitives Rome portrays them as. The Marcomanni and Quadi observed that at least some Romans can be reasoned with rather than simply feared. Seeds of understanding were planted, even if most will never take root. You find meaning in such small things. After 23 years on this frontier, Lucilia, I've learned that small meanings are often the only kind available to us. History may record great battles and conquests, but life is lived in moments of individual choice and connection. 'Tis outside in the gathering darkness. Faustus walked the perimeter of the fortress as part of his assigned patrol duty. His leg had healed completely now, the battle that had wounded him already fading in his memory like a dream upon waking. The diplomatic mission to the Marcomanni, though lacking in combat or glory, had affected him more deeply than he had expected. Thinking deep thoughts, boy? Titus's familiar voice came from the shadows as the veteran fell into step beside him. Just reflecting on our recent mission, Faustus replied. It seems strange that we marched all that way, met with potential enemies, and returned without a single sword being drawn in anger. Disappointed? Titus asked, though his tone suggested he knew the answer. No, Faustus admitted. Actually, I found it interesting, seeing how different the reality of these tribes is from what we're told in training. Watching the general find a way to fulfill our orders without creating unnecessary conflict. "You're developing a dangerous condition called perspective, boy," Titus said with mock solemnity. "The Legion tries to train it out of most soldiers, makes it harder to follow orders without question." Faustus smiled slightly at the veteran's humor. "Is that why you've remained a centurion instead of seeking higher rank? Too much perspective?" "That, and a healthy appreciation for staying alive," Titus replied. "Higher rank means greater responsibility for Rome's follies. I'm content to execute orders intelligently rather than issue them unwisely." They continued their patrol in companionable silence, two soldiers of Rome walking the perimeter of an empire that had expanded and contracted like breathing lungs for centuries, its individual representatives coming and going while the institution itself endured. Battles were fought that changed nothing in the grand narrative of history, yet meant everything to those who fought them or avoided fighting them when possible. And perhaps, in the end, that was enough, not to change the course of empires or secure one's name in the histories, but to maintain one's humanity within a system designed to sacrifice it for glory and power, to fight only the battles that mattered, and to recognize that sometimes the greatest victory was the battle not fought at all. As winter descended upon the northern frontier, bringing snow and ice that temporarily slowed the endless cycle of conflict, the 10th Legion settled into its winter quarters. There would be other campaigns when spring arrived, other meaningless battles to fight, other absurd orders to interpret and execute as intelligently as possible. But for now, in this brief moment of relative peace, soldiers like Marcus, Lucilia, Faustus, and Titus could reflect on the small meanings they had found amid the grand meaninglessness of empire. And in those small meanings, a life saved, a massacre prevented, understanding achieved, however briefly, they found purpose enough to continue serving a cause larger than themselves, even when that cause frequently proved unworthy of their service. For in the space between duty and conscience, between orders given and orders executed, they had discovered a form of honor that transcended Rome's glory and would outlast its empire. In the quiet of a winter night, as snow fell silently on the fortress walls and distant Germanic settlements alike, General Marcus Valerius Aquila stood on the ramparts, looking out across the moonlit landscape. After 23 years on this frontier, fighting battles that changed nothing in the grand sweep of history, he had come to a simple truth. The meaning of his service lay not in the empire he represented, but in how he represented it, with wisdom, restraint, and humanity in a role that often demanded their sacrifice. It was not the glorious purpose he had imagined as a young officer, but it was purpose nonetheless. And in a world of meaningless battles and forgotten victories, perhaps that quiet purpose was the only true triumph available. A battle for human dignity that, even if it changed nothing in the grand narrative of history, changed everything for those whose lives were touched by it.